Okay, welcome to session 311 of Faith and Calm. And what's the topic tonight, Yaskel Shimon?
You came up with the title.
You tell, the title. Okay, I'll tell you. The title is the true source of anxiety. You'll be surprised. And that's actually the topic of my talk halfway through this. And there's a good story that goes with it. And you will be surprised when you find out the true source of anxiety. Okay, go ahead, Yaskel Shimon. And I know you're talking tonight about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, no?
Yes, I'm
Tell us who
talking.
he is.
Well, you show a picture, or do the people in the thing don't know? No,
Okay.
that's not going to go up
Okay,
very
it's
well.
oh, it goes very well. How's that? That's the Rebbe's father, our Rebbe's father. His name is Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and an amazing person. He went through as you can see, this picture was taken when they first arrested him, right? Is that right, Yaskel Shimon?
Yes.
And he has a picture after they had him for a while, and it makes this picture look like a movie star. Yeah. He went through such a hard time, suffered so much. The Rebbe's father suffered so much, and the Rebbe's mother suffered so much. And the Rebbe suffered. Yeah. Go ahead, Yaskel Shimon. What do you want to tell us?
Okay. You want me to go first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yes, today is the 20th of Av. It is the yard site of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, Shneersohn, who was the father, as Shlomo should have said, of the Rebbe. And um, the Rebbe used to speak every year on his yard site. He used to learn
On his father's
Mishmayos.
yard site, yeah.
Yes, and
Yeah.
yeah, not on his yard site,
Obviously,
obviously.
yeah. Go ahead.
It's not going to work. But and there's many stories about him. And the reason to talk about, I think, about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is the time of year. We're going from Parkas Akev and Tisha B'Av to Re'eh. And Re'eh is an interesting thing. It says, Ray, I see before you the curses and the blessings. And that's what we're transitioning from, because Tisha B'Av is certainly seeing the hardships and the troubles and the anxiety and what, like my wife is talking about, in the hell that the Soviet Union was, and then Ray is also that there's blessings in here that this is all about all this trouble and all this difficulty is about actually eventually building something that's better. That's the only reason the Abishter ever brings any of this stuff is you destroy in order to build better, like Rabbi Rutkin, who's destroying the Aron HaKodesh in the shul in order to build a nicer one. The halachic issues there are multifold.
No, that's the only way. The only way you're allowed to destroy a shul is for the purpose of building a better one in its place on that site.
And Rabbi Levi certainly saw the worst part of the Soviet Union. I mean, he was born in, I think, 1878. He he was appointed by the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, to go to Yekaranis Linoslav, which, if you want any place in Russia, which was not,
yeah,
it was
Yekaterinslav.
Renislav.
Yekaterinoslav.
Yekaterinoslav. Yeah,
Okay,
Katrina. Yes, the Empress Katrina.
Yes, yeah.
Of course, by the time the Soviets took over, they had to change that name because Empress Catherine was part of the old aristocracy, and they changed it to Dnepropetrovsk.
Dnepropetrovsk.
Now it's just called Dnieper, I think. And
right now, Dnieper.
Dnieper.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm struggling, but that's what you learn. And because they didn't like that, so they named it after the river that was there, and that was a very university town, very heretical liberal kind of town, and he had a lot of trouble because every single Jewish faction was working there: the Zionists, the Communists, the Avsexionists, every group was involved, the atheists and so forth. Every kind of Jew that was there. It was certainly not a religious town, but it had religious Jews, obviously, but he had a lot of struggle with the people in there. And then, of course, when the communists took over, they were ruthless in persecuting rabbis. The way they did it first is they closed the shuls, and then they said the rabbi doesn't have a job, so he's a leech on the society. So they would call him, a counter-revolutionary. And they also they made a special. Here's one little story with the Levi Yitzchak. So he was in a lot of trouble a great deal of time because his rent in his apartment. They only put him in a little apartment, and they gave it a rent of 500 rubles a month, and the average rent was running like 20 rubles a month
Oh
at
my
that time.
gosh.
And that's because they said he was this parasite on society, a rabbi and so forth. He couldn't pay that. So he happened to be older and so forth. So he tried to make the case that he was retired as a rabbi, and his son was providing for him. So the Rebbe sent from Paris a letter saying, "Yes, I'm providing for my elderly parents." And so the rate went back down, but then he was taken back to court, and they tried to raise it back up to 500 and so forth. And it was an interesting story how he got out of that. He got so threading backwards, there was an incident that happened in the town once where a woman knocked on the door. I think it was in 1935, and it was already heavily under the Soviet Union. She said, I want to be
Under the
married, and I
communists.
want to be married in a kosher way." Now, having 10 people together and having a whole wedding with a chuppah is like is a forbidden activity by the Soviet Union in those days. So he thought about it, but Levi Yitzchak was like all the Shneersohns, was fearless. He was one of the few rabbis who actually spoke out against the KGB, the NKVD, and the Soviets, saying, what they're doing is trying to destroy religion. And most of the other rabbis left. They were forced out. Chafetz Chaim left. Rabbi Feinstein left the Soviet Union. Everyone left, saying it's impossible. But he stayed, and he stayed, and he fought them. So he said, "Yeah,
Can I
I'll
make one
do."
correction?
Yeah,
I don't know that we know that he was.
yeah, yeah. I
We
heard it
we
from
don't.
Rabbi Paul,
Okay,
Paul
but
Thiel. Yeah.
okay, but we don't know for sure that he was fearless because we're not him. What we do know is that he was unyielding.
Unyielding.
He
Okay,
may have had
good.
fear, but he was unyielding.
Unyielding.
Go ahead.
Good. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. So anyway, so he said, "Okay, I'll do it." And then they only had 9 people. So then he went there was a spy in the building whose job was to report on everybody going in and out of the apartment. And he
Rabbi
was a
Levi
Jewish guy,
Yitzchak's
of Levi
apartment.
Yitzchak's apartment. So he went down to his door and he said, "I need you as a tenth for a minion for a wedding." He goes, "Me?" And he said, and he brought him up, and it was a very holy wedding. And he said, I'm not going to say anything about this whole thing. So anyway, so he was one of the people who actually helped make this wedding. Now later, he testified in court that Levi Yitzchak had retired as a rabbi. He wasn't doing rabbinical things. He was just doing, his own religious kind of stuff, and therefore he was allowed to be, have his rent reduced. And there was three communists and two non-Jewish civilians there, and they all agreed that that his rent could be reduced. So this is sort of a picture of what it was like to be in the Dnepropetrovsk and to fight against the communists and so forth. Of course, we know the rest of the other parts of the story. They're pretty famous and so forth. If you haven't heard them before, I mean, he was. He had trouble getting the position in Ekaterinslav. This was even under the old regime because, as I said, everybody wanted their own kind of chief rabbi for the city. So the communists had theirs, the socialists had theirs, and so forth. So the Rebbe Rashab asked them to get smicha from some of the greatest rabbis of the time, Lubavitch and non-Lubavitch, some very Litvish, the Brisker Rebbe, Rabbi Gorodatsky, and so forth. They had 12 smichas from all sorts of different people. So he really knew his stuff. And you'll see that later on, he knew everything about that. He knew it by
By
heart.
heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He knew his stuff by heart. So let me jump ahead then, So they eventually the news kept tightening on rabbis. The other Shneersohn, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Shneersohn, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe,
His cousin.
was
His
arrested,
cousin.
expelled he had to leave Russia altogether, and so he would. But Rabbi Levi, he didn't leave. He was offered positions, like many of the other rabbis who got out of the Soviet Union. They could get out if they were offered a position. Interestingly enough, Levi Yitzchak was offered a position in Boston to be the chief rabbi of
Are
Boston.
you serious?
Yes, he was.
Wow.
But they wouldn't leave because they had one son who was in the sanatorium, and that was a
Wow.
brother of the Rebbe. And so they stayed, and eventually he was killed during World War II because the Nazis came in, found him there, and killed him. So
Because he was a Shneersohn or
because he
just
was a Jew,
because he was a Jew?
Jew.
Oh,
They
because
killed
he
them
the
all
Nazis, yeah.
Jews. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there was only one brother, other of the Rebbe left. That was Aryeh Leib, who did survive the war because he was also in Paris along with the Rebbe. So now Rabbi Levi Yitzchak did survive the war, but the way he survived it was very difficult. So it was 1939. And one of the things that he was very involved with in the Ukraine, because Ukraine was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, was built making matzahs. Now, not every year did they come from the Ukraine. Sometimes it was shipped in because it was hard to
The
do it in the
matzahs.
Soviet Union because all the wheat was under the control of the communists. But some years he was able to get to actually do the matzah. Now, why was it? Why do I say just some years? Because by law, all the in the Soviet Union, all the wheat was bleached, and that means by with water, and you have to use unbleached raw wheat that's never been touched with water to be shmur matzah for Pesach. So Levi Yitzchak had a connection with the president of the Communist Party. His name was Kalinin. That's so they had a dual track system. They had officially a premier. You might have heard some of those people, Lenin and Stalin and Brezhnev and Gorbachev. Those were the heads of the Communist Party. But there was an official titular president of the country who was supposed to have power. So in that days, it was a man named Kalinin, and he was an interesting character. He was a little bit non-conventional, and Rabbi Shneersohn had a connection with him, and so he petitioned him and said, "Listen, I want to make matzahs for the Jews," and Kalinin approved it. So, much to the chagrin of the NKVD and the KGB, Rabbi Shneersohn was put in charge of collecting the money for the processing and doing the matzah.
Collecting
Now,
the
the
wheat.
actual
Yeah.
the communists like the idea of making matzahs in a certain way. They like it under their control, but because it was high priced, and so they would get more money that way. But Rabbi Levi Yitzchak said, "Yeah, but it's got to be 100% kosher according to my rules," and they didn't like that at all because he made them crazy. He said, "You need new sifters, you need new pots, you need new kalim," and that cost a tremendous amount. And remember, the Soviet Union was still struggling in the 20s and 30s, tremendous famine and lack of money and things of that sort. So this cost them a lot of money, and they were not very happy with him. But the thing that really broke their patience altogether was one time there was a train coming with a trainload of wheat, and it passed under a bridge, and there was a leak, and the leak dripped on the train and went through a hole in there and got into the train. And so Rabbi Lissuk said, that wheat we can't use. It's been touched by water, and therefore it's already starting to chometz, and they were furious with him. And so eventually they arrested him in 1939 and put him through all sorts of torture. As Shalom Ashuda said, that picture is him being arrested, and he was not happy at all. There's actually opinions. I don't know that it's true. I don't buy it. And
What?
so where some say that it was the yarmulke was painted on later. They don't like the picture of the yarmulke. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, I don't think they had the Adobe Photoshop in those days. So I really can't see how that could have happened. And then there was another picture that was done in
Yes.
1944 when
I'm
he
trying to
was
see
in
if they have
Amalauta.
it.
No, they don't have that
They
picture.
don't have the
Nobody likes
picture.
to show that picture
I saw it
because
online.
one time that was the first picture they ever got because all of his books were confiscated. He had thousands and thousands of manuscripts that he wrote himself in Kabbalah on the different subjects and so forth, and they gave the apartment to somebody else, and the guy used it for firewood, and so the rest is buried under a building that they built on this place. Frierdiker Rebbe says he hopes that eventually they'll find this stuff. It's still underneath a building there. He wrote a tremendous amount of Torah, but we don't have it. and all his possessions, including all his photos, were lost too. So after the war, towards the end of the war, they had a picture of him, but he was in 5 years of prison. He must have aged like 80 years, So if you see him looking older there, he was like 64 in that picture.
Really?
60, I think he died 68. So maybe he was 63 in that picture. He really looked very old. The Rebbe saw that picture and he wrote on the
The
back,
picture
"Is this my the later
afterwards. The
picture?" And he
later
said, "Is
picture.
this my father?" He didn't believe that was his father even, and because it was so transformed. Anyway, this picture we got much later on. So he was arrested. Went through 5 different prisons, beaten, tortured. I have a book with all the interrogations with him and so forth. And finally, they decided to send him off to Kazakhstan. And in Kazakhstan, the capital was Alma-Ata, but they didn't let him stay there. They sent him to a tiny little village. It's just a little bit north of Tibet, near Uzbekistan and so forth, called Chile. We call it Chile because we're Americans, but
Chile.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Chile. No, but Rabbi, Rabbi Paltiel didn't know how to pronounce it either, really, the
Okay.
real pronunciation. And it was just a bunch of huts, really, and I'll give you a little picture of how miserable that situation was. Mosquitoes constantly. You couldn't sleep. They were in the air. They were everywhere and so forth. He came off. You had to pay for your own room, and he went to a Jewish tailor who had married a shiksa there, and the guy threw him out, wouldn't let him stay there, and then he found another place with 2 non-Jews, and they had a 2-room house with no door between the rooms and just a bed, and that was basically it. And as I said, it was mud floors, full of bugs and insects all day long, whizzing, hard to sleep and so forth. Hard to cook anything because the bugs would get into all your food and so forth. I don't know
And
how he
Jews
managed.
can't eat
Me
bugs.
can't eat bugs, and it's just really a miserable situation there. Like 2 pots and so forth, not kosher, and he wouldn't use them. Eventually, his wife came and tried to help him there, and she brought pots, but they lost them somebody stole them on the train. She had to go like 40 miles to the nearest town to find some new pots because he wouldn't use any other food. And this was right before Pesach and so forth. And she managed to make food for them, and it was really very, very difficult situation. And on top of it, he had to report every 10 days. And if it was Shabbos, he would have to report with his card, and so he would give it to a non-Jewish woman, and she would carry it, and they knew what he was doing, and they said, "Don't keep Shabbos here in this place," and so forth. It was just they really made his life terrible, and at the end, it was in 1944. Finally, the Jews managed to bribe somebody because you weren't supposed to be released from your sentence until after the war, and even though his 5 years were up, and they got him into Alma Ata, where he passed away in a few months. Probably, we don't really know the exact disease, but he is buried there in Alma Ata in a non-Jewish cemetery. And the Rebbe used to make sure that anybody who would help him or helped his mother after the war or anything like that, he was always grateful because he was not able to go himself to take care of his father. In fact, he never saw his father again since 1927 when he went to Leningrad to see the Frierdiker Rebbe. And so that was the last time he saw him because afterwards he got married in Warsaw and then he ended up in the United States. And so Rebbe was clearly not able to go and help his father or his mother in the Soviet Union. So one final story that I want to tell, which really sort of captures, and I think it's I think it's very, very interesting. A little bit about Rabbi Levi, and about and his wife, the Rebbetzin Chana, and the regality of them. Because they say that you know the Rebbetzin said it herself. She said one time she was one of these Farbrengens that she had for about her husband, which she would have a regular Farbrengen every
Seriously.
the 20th of Av, right?
Uh-huh.
And she would invite various people, and she spoke there
Where?
in Crown Heights.
She would have a Farbrengen on
Yeah,
top,
she would
in
have it.
addition to the
People,
Rebbe's Farbrengen?
yes, and she would have
Wow.
very people come. And she said, I knew many great people. My father, my husband, Frierdiker Rebbe. but my son is greater than all of them, and he's much more quiet than anyone else. Nobody knows his real greatness, and I'm not saying this as a mother. I'm saying this as a chassid. And and so, if you want to know a little bit about the greatness of the Rebbe, they say in Yiddish, they have a statement that it's from the Gemara. They say that he's a mana ben pras, which means that he is a whole, like a whole dollar, that's the son of a part, a 50% dollar, which means as follows. If the son is greater than the father, they say sometimes you can see that because of the father. Now, in the case of the Rebbe was very great. So his father was also very great, but he's sort of eclipsed by the fact of the Rebbe. But we can't really see the Rebbe. It's like looking at the sun, it's a little bit too intense. But if you want to see the Rebbe, his father was amazing, amazing Makabel. When he was in Chile, he thrived on saying Hasidus constantly. Well, especially Kabbalah. He said all sorts of things in it, and he wrote tremendously. And he had this fountain of information, and he had no paper, and he had nothing to write with. So his wife, the Rebbetzin Chana, had Rachmanis on him. She brought a few books with her, Zohar, a few other books, and he said, "Can you make some ink for me?" So she went and she picked area flowers and berries, and she figured out how she could boil this down and to make inks. And we have his notes. They're written on the side of the book. I don't think it's not here. The margins around the side in tiny little letters, and all sorts of different colored inks. And these eventually became like a 5-volume set, a 6-volume set that the Rebbe published of his father's commentary on the Zohar and on different books and so forth. And he himself was just a tremendous fountain. When he was in Alma Ata after the war, there was a guy named Rabinowitz, a young bacher, who came, and he was like bringing food and other things to the house and so forth. And one time it was Erev Tisha B'Av, and the Rebbe the Levi Yitzchak started telling him all sorts of Kabbalistic ideas, and he went on and on and on, half hour, and so forth. And the Rebbetzin, his wife, was telling him, he has to go home. He has to prepare for the fast. You have to prepare for the fast. Well, he wasn't fat. Eat something.
Eat something, yeah.
And Levi didn't even pay attention. He just went on and on into the night. And then eventually this guy had to go home, and he had to fast for a day and a half. But when he got home, his parents told him, "Oh, it's so good that you didn't come home right away, because the KGB came here and they were going to bring you to the army, and they were going to bring you to the front lines, which front lines in Soviet Union basically meant you die, because that's the way the Soviet Union beat the Nazis. They just threw people at them to stop the bullets. That until they finally ran out of bullets. So 20 million people died in the World War II in the Soviet Union." So my story is a little bit about, he did this all by heart. He didn't know anything. He didn't have any of his books with him. He just spoke and spoke and wrote and wrote and wrote. And he even wrote a note about himself a few days before he died, explaining his entire life and how gematria of his name, Levi Yitzchak ben, I forget what his mother's name was, or something like that, how it connects to every single time he was arrested, how many years he spent in prison. Levi is a word of Gevura, Yitzchak is a word of Gevura, so he was going to have a very hard life and so forth. I mean, he saw all of this, just like he saw that this kid shouldn't go home, and he was just amazing. He saw everything through the light of Kabbalah. Okay, so a little bit about him and a little bit about his wife. This is the story I wanted to tell. And it hit me last night.
Rabbi Levi Yitzchak also fasted for a day and a half?
I don't know if he did or he did not. He had a doctor who was telling him, you have to be on a liquid diet only. And it was right before Pesach. And he said,
you just said
okay, but this was when he got there. And it was right before Pesach. And he came to the house and he saw the whole Pesach Seder there with the mur and the matzah and everything else. He said, you can't eat that stuff. And Levi Yitzchak said, that's not on the account. That's not food. That's holiness, and so forth. So he ate that stuff anyway. So I don't know. And he had his own rules about what kept him going, and he kept going miraculously on and on. So the story I'm trying to get to is as follows. So there was a guy there. His name was uh, uh, Shanowitz. I just had it on the tip of my tongue there.
Okay, just keep telling the story.
Um, all right. I'll try to remember. Shmaya, his son is a shaliach in, oh golly. All right.
Just keep going.
Anyway, he was a young bacher in Lubavitch in Tamche Tamima. And Tamimim. Tamche Tamima. Tamche Tamimim. Hoshiyana. Anyway, in those days, it was a custom sometimes to send the older Bachrim to collect money to fund the yeshiva. So he went to different towns and he came to the Dnepropetrovsk. And there in the Dnepropetrovsk,
Oh, this is a story before.
this is a time earlier, yes. This is
Uh-huh.
a time sometime in the 20s, the early days of
Uh-huh.
the Frierdiker
Uh-huh.
Rebbe's
Uh-huh.
of the Rebbe, the Levi Yitzchak being in Dnepropetrovsk. And he came there and he didn't know anybody Jewish, anybody there. He didn't know anybody, he didn't Chabadniks. All he knew was there was one Chabadnik in town. He knew about Reb Leivik. Leivik, that's what they called him in those days. They called him Leivik, Levi Yitzchak Shneersohn. So he found the address and he goes to the door, and it was an apartment. And he knocks on the door, and the Rebbetzin Chana opens the door, and she says, "No, what do you want?" And he says, "Is Leivik here?" And he sees that the Rebbitzin was not happy with him being so familiar with these, calling him not Rabbi Levi, Rabbi Tzurta. He was the chief rabbi of the town. And this was a bacher. And he calls him Leivik. Is Leivik here? The Rebbe once had a Farbrengen once, and he said, what is this with Chabad that we don't give a lot of titles and honorifics and so on? And he analyzed the whole thing and why we don't do that and so forth. But anyway, that
So what
was
happened? Yeah,
so
Bolshevik.
he could see that she was not happy. Her eyes changed. She didn't say anything, but she just, she looked at him in a certain way that just struck fear inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Rabbi Levi came out. He was warm to him. He helped him find some people and so forth. He stayed there for a couple of weeks, and eventually he left and he said goodbye. And he saw,
stayed in their house?
not in their house, but another apartment.
Okay.
And he saw, though, that the Rebbetzin Chana was still upset with him. And many years pass by, and the war happens, and he escapes from Russia. They escape. Well, Levi didn't escape. But his wife eventually escaped after he passes away. Came through the underground, through poking Germany and all the other things the Lubavitchers escaped and so forth, and they end up and they see each other again. And now Shanowitz. Shanowitz, did I say? Shanowitz, I don't know. He was a very big, one of the big rabbanim of those days. He was smart earlier, but he became one of the main rabbis involved in all sorts of cases of agunas, had on Beis-Dins and so forth. And he sees the Rebbitzin again, and he says hello. They hadn't seen each other for many years, and he can see that she was still mad at him. Time goes by. He becomes a big rabbi in Israel, writing many Sforim. He wrote stories about his life and so forth. And occasionally he would come to New York, and he happened to, and now the Rebbe was the Rebbe, and he would see the Rebbitzin, and the Rebbitzin was
Rebbitzin
Chana, yeah. And she was still upset with him. So one time he came, and it was Chaf Av, and there was this Farbrengen at the Rebbitzin Chana's apartment, where various rabbis would come and speak and so forth and say things, and he actually was invited there. He went there and he came, and at one point in time he asked the Rebbitzin, could he get up and say a few words? So she allowed him to say it because he was an important Rav in Chabad. So he gets up and he says the following. He says, there's a Gemara, and it says that the rabbis of Bavel are always called Rav Ashi, Rav Amnon. They were given the title of Rav. Um, and the rabbis earlier, the ones in Eretz Israel were called Rebbe because they got smicha. So they were called, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Those called Rabbi. So they were on a higher level. And then there are certain rabbis that were called Rabban, like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel. And that's because they were the Nasi, they were the leader of the generation, and therefore they were given a special title called Rabban. And he said, but the Gemara continues and it says, but greater than all of those are those who were just called by their name. For example, Hillel. He's not called Rabbi Hillel, it's called Hillel. And Shammai, he's just called Shammai in the Gemara. And Leivik. And he says Leivik. And she got the message, and he saw that she had finally accepted his apology.
Very interesting.
So I thought that
Cute.
was the cute story.
Yeah.
Then go ahead.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So I'm going to our topic, the topic that I put in the title for the night. And the topic is, what is the real source of anxiety? I'm going to move closer to the microphone. Okay, so it's only you. Picture's only you. So okay, so what is the true source of anxiety? And I'm going to talk about. I have somebody that I know. She's not local, but I've known her for many, 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 many years, and I've known her through many phases of her life. And she she knows how to worry. She's a very good worrier, and there's an interesting thing about her. She has a powerful connection to Hashem. She's not Orthodox. She doesn't really keep Shabbos, and she keeps some kind of kosher, but she is she has a very, very powerful connection to Hashem. He's like her best friend, right? She talks to Hashem all the time and relies on him. So anyway, but she is subject to this tremendous anxiety from time to time, and she can think of, like if something happens, she'll come up with, but what if, but what if, but what if, but what if, and she can really do it to the point of torturing herself.
And don't worry, she's not going to watch this video.
Okay, stop. So anyway, you don't know who it is anyway. So anyway, so recently she's gone through such an episode. Something happened, something of a little bit of concern, not something that people would get bent out of shape about, but she got pretty bent out of shape to an extreme extent. And she was in extreme anxiety, day after day after day, extreme anxiety. And and she called me several times, and I've always thought that she would actually benefit from an antidepressant, a mild one, a mild, serotonin uptake inhibitor. And her doctor had recommended it a long time ago, but she's afraid of medicine, so she doesn't do it. And, whatever, medicines are something to be examined. They're something to not just take willy-nilly. But anyway, so I again got on my, put on my doctor's hat and said, you might benefit from just a little small dose of an antidepressant. Maybe you wouldn't go so deep into anxiety. And so I spoke to her again yesterday, and she had thought up a lot of new ways that she could be in horrible trouble. And I gave her my same advice. And then I hung up the phone, and I was listening I have on my phone, I was listening to a class about the Baal Shem Tov. And, and as I'm listening to this class of the Baal Shem Tov, all of a sudden I remembered, wait a minute, doesn't the Baal Shem Tov teach that if that it's and I'm sorry, I can't find the source right now, but the Baal Shem Tov, or at least somebody from him, one of his pupils, but I think it starts with him. I think it starts with him that if a person is experiencing tremendous anxiety, very often it is not the thing that is happening in this physical world that is the source of anxiety. It is the soul's anxiety the person is experiencing because they're doing something that's not right. They're doing something that bothers the soul very much. And that's why they're having this tremendous anxiety. The other thing is like a show. It's like a mask for the true anxiety. So I thought, wow, I'm grabbing the phone and I'm gonna call her. So I grabbed the phone and called her, and I told her my theory, and she said, "Shalamas Yehudis, for the past 4 days, as long as this anxiety has been going on, I've been telling myself, my dear, I think there's something deeper going on here. I think that I think this is what she said. I think it's because I feel I don't feel right about how I'm not speaking loud enough. I don't feel right about how I treat Shabbos. I know that Shabbos is holy. I just, her parents never kept Shabbos, and she feels, well, it's not my style. But she knows so much about Hashem that and she said, I think there's something not right with me spiritually. There's not something right with my soul. And it's so interesting that I had that insight and called her, and and um, and it's true in it's true in everybody's life. It's true no matter where you are on the, and you can't really get much higher than her in her relationship with Hashem. It's really something awesome. But in my life too, in all our lives, there's maybe there's some, you can observe every mitzvah in the book. But if there's somebody that it's also a mitzvah to talk nicely to people, but if there's somebody that you don't treat, another Jew that you don't treat with enough respect, that also is very wearing on the soul. Or if you make mishmash of your blessings before eating or after eating, that's also wearing on the soul. So anyway, she's coming up with a plan for what she wants to do. But I just wanted to remind us all that is so often the source of anxiety. It's not the thing that we pin it on that's happening in the physical world. It's something higher. It's anxiety that's coming directly from the soul. It's not something we're doing is not sitting well with the soul. So I'm going to tell a little story that is somewhat related to that. There's a man. The story is about. Thank you, Rabbi Zalman Tachtel of Chabad of the University of Kansas, for the story. And there's a man, Rabbi Chaim Dayan. He lives in Kfar Chabad. And back in the time of the First Lebanon War, when was that? The First Lebanon War, about
1980, maybe, I think.
okay, good.
I don't know why I
So,
say that,
so
but
this story happened during that time, the First Lebanon War. Just a second, we're going to take a sip.
I got the name. Rabbi Sisonkin.
Oh, so wow. Okay, good. So anyway, back in the time of the First Lebanon War, he was already not serving in active duty. He was in the reserves, and he got a call from his commander. And back then, it was probably a telephone call. He got a call from his commander saying that you're called up tomorrow. You have to be 8:30 at the base in Bat Galin, which was like 2 hours away from Kfar Chabad. He lived in Kfar Chabad, which is started out as a village, but now it's a bustling city full of Chabadniks. And so he said, okay, fine. He hung up, and then he thought about it. Wait a minute, 8:30 and it's 2 hours away. I'm gonna miss Minyan. And he thought, well, I don't know. Is that such a good idea? I'm going to go fight in a war, and we want all the merit that we can have. I'm not going to miss Minyan. I'm not going to just daven quickly on my own. That's not good for anybody. So I don't know if he made the right decision or the wrong decision, but you'll hear. So he got up and he got the earliest minyan, the sunrise minyan, and sunrise was at 6 a.m. at that time. And they finished precisely at 7. At 7 he runs to, he figures, I have to be there at 8:30. I cannot take a bus anymore. The bus is going to take longer than an hour and a half. I have to hitch. So he ran outside Kfar Chabad to an intersection, whatever, and nobody's stopping, which is very unusual because in Israel, a lot of people stop to pick up a soldier or somebody in the reserves. It's just very, very normal. It's very done. People want to do anything they can to help the soldiers, but nobody's stopping. And then a car comes and it stops, and he's about to ask the guy if he can have a lift, but meantime a soldier hops out, and the car speeds away, and the soldier explained, yeah, I'm also going north, but this is as far as he was going, so he dropped me off here. A truck pulls up. The truck is full of oranges, packed with oranges in the back, just packed. And our hero, Chaim Dayan, is thinking, wait a minute, do I really want to go with that truck? That truck is not going to go as fast as the car. It's loaded. It's not going to go as fast as the car. It'll take a long time. I don't know. And then, so the
Oh,
truck
when you,
actually,
I'm
yeah.
very sorry. When you whisper, that's hard to hear
Oh,
then.
oh, and was I whispering? I'm
Yeah.
so sorry.
It feels like it.
Okay, I'm gonna go like this and hold this in my hand. This is so heavy, Schulschmidt. So anyway, so anyway, so uh, meanwhile, the other guy hops into the truck, and our first guy, Chaim Dayan, is thinking, wait a minute, I was here first. How come he's leaping onto that truck? And should I get mad at him? Should I yell that I was here first? And he thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to bother doing that. And the truck speeds away. And he's thinking, oh no, what am I going to do? It's getting worse and worse. Not to show up to a mission is a very bad thing. It's not, and it's not cool to arrive late, because at 8:30, if the mission is 8:30, that means they pull out in buses from the army base at 8:30. So so anyway, he didn't know what to do, and time is passing. It's just passing. Soon it's only an hour and 15 minutes away from 8:30. It's only an hour and 15 minutes to get to the base, and he's thinking it's not possible anymore. It's not possible even in a car. It is just not possible. I don't know what I'm going to do, and there's no way. And then an ambulance comes and screeches to a halt next to him. And the guy in the ambulance, the driver, says, "Soldier, I need you. Get into my car. Get into this ambulance right away. I have a soldier in the back, and he's in combat shock, and I'm driving, and I can't be, and I need somebody to keep talking to him. Apparently, it would be bad if the guy just passed out. I don't know what it is, but he said I need somebody to keep talking to him, and I can't do it. I'm driving." And so he said, "Will you do it?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And he hops into the place. The soldier is laying down on his back, and his eyes are wildly going around in their sockets, and his mouth is open, and and he just looks like he looks like it's just a frightening thing to look at. And the guy sits down, our Chaim Dayan sits down, and he starts talking to him about the weather, and he starts talking about sports, and he starts talking about the news, and there's no change in this guy at all. No change in this guy at all. So Chaim figures, you know what? I'm just going to talk about that which I care about. And he starts talking about Hashem, and he starts talking about optimistic things that the Rebbe says, and he starts telling him everything he knows about Torah. And the guy starts calming down, and his eyes stop whirling around. And so he just keeps going. He's saying everything that he can think of, and it's coming straight from his heart. And the guy is calming down incredibly. They reach his base. They reach his base, and the driver says, "It's okay. The hospital is only 5 minutes away from here. You can get out now, and you did an incredible job. Thank you so much." So the guy hops out. He makes his you know. I forgot to tell you an exciting part. Before that happened, I left out a cute part of the story. When the ambulance is racing up north, there's a big traffic jam, a huge traffic jam they run into. What happened? There's a truck that's loaded with oranges, and the oranges went all over the road. And he sees the guy who hitched with that thing. He's standing so upset on the road, and the traffic is at a standstill. But the ambulance has absolutely no problem. The ambulance simply goes on the shoulder and races past all of that and gets him to the base in terrific time. So so anyway, he's happy, everybody's happy. Several years pass, and he's in Tel Aviv, and some guy comes over to him and says, some young guy comes over to him and says, aren't you the guy who talked to me in the ambulance? Aren't you that guy? You look like that guy." And he said, "Yeah, I talked to, yes, I am. I am the guy." And they hug and hug and hug. And the other guy says, "Look at me. Do you see? I have a kippah on my head. Look at me. I'm wearing tzitzis." He said it didn't happen all at once, but I started to I could piece together everything that you said to me. I remembered everything you said to me, and I decided to explore this stuff myself. And now look at me. Thank you so much. So anyway, sometimes talking about, even just talking about Hashem, that's what this guy was in combat shock. But feeding his soul was the answer that he needed. He needed his soul to be fed, and when his soul was fed, his anxiety calmed down dramatically. So we should all remember we have this thing inside us called the neshama, and the neshama needs care, and the neshama needs mitzvahs. That's what the neshama thrives on, and when the neshama thrives, we thrive. So anyway, I'm gonna thank you for joining, and I'm gonna turn off the recording now. And and we should all give Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was an amazing, amazing person. He had the hardest life you can possibly imagine. And his wife, Hannah, she had a terribly hard life. After he passed away, they were in the middle of nowhere in this Alma Ata, in the middle of nowhere. And, they had been a very tight couple, right? And she had taken care of him so carefully, and all, she sacrificed her own health to leave Moscow and join him in exile and take care of him. And then when he passed away, she was just, worn, and she stayed in Alma Ata. And one Shabbos, everybody was very poor there. And one Shabbos, somebody went past her door and said, he just suspected something. Something came to him. He suspected something, and he said, "Hannah, do you have food cooking for Shabbos?" And she said, "Why do you ask such a question? Don't you know my situation?" And she had nothing. She had nothing to eat. Nobody realized that. So he went home. He told his wife, "Take a chicken leg, put it in a bowl, fill it with chicken soup. I'm taking it to Rebbe Hannah." And he did, and she accepted the soup. And they realized she's starving, And they came to the conclusion that she can't stay here in Alma Ata. She has, by that time, no, he wasn't Rebbe yet. The Rebbe became Rebbe in 1950. But they said, "We have to get her out of here." And she was so weak and so broken, so not broken, no, Shneersohn is never broken, but so worn out that this person came and said, "We're putting you on a train and you're going to a bigger location, and then from there we'll figure out the rest." And he packed up her clothes for her. And I can't even imagine the Shneersohn needing her clothes packed, but that's the state that she was in after her husband passed away. And they found somebody to accompany her on the train, and eventually she left with a group of other Hasidim. They left Russia. She actually left with, if anybody knows Mrs. Gurkov, Mrs. Krana Gurkov, she was the Rebbitzin at Shela House way before Rebbe Rudkin got there. She and her husband, Yibad L'chaim L'chaim, and she was on that same shipment of people. And eventually she made it out of Russia. She made it to France, and the Rebbe came and picked her up and brought her back to America. So, and once she was in America, she had a completely different life. She was with her son, who was by that point, I believe by that point he was the Rebbe, and it was a completely different life, Baruch Hashem. Anyway, so thank you for joining us tonight, and I'm going to turn off the recording. And here we go.
Right.